They called her slow and useless because of her weight, but when she saw a shackled Apache warrior, she found a courage no one expected and became the mother his daughter had always dreamed of. The September sun beat down like a hot iron on the streets of San Miguel del Desierto. Lucia walked slowly through the town square, her eyes downcast, her dark red dress clinging to her back with sweat. Each step kicked up dust that stuck to her damp skin. 32 years old, a widow for 4, alone in the world since she buried Rodrigo in that dry cemetery behind the church. She carried her basket of breads as she always did on Thursdays. Hard breads she sold for a few cents to the traders passing through town. Breads no one wanted, just like her. Her mother had died giving birth to her younger sister. Her drunken father had blamed her for everything ever since. "If you weren't so ugly, Rodrigo would still be alive," he would say when the alcohol loosened his tongue. "A man dies of a broken heart when he marries a woman who's no good to look at." But Rodrigo had never said that. Rodrigo had loved her. He called her my full moon and laughed when she shrunk in embarrassment. "You don't see how beautiful you are," he would whisper in the dark. "You have eyes that shine like stars." He died defending a caravan from bandits, 3 shots to the chest. He bled in her arms until his last breath. Now she lived in the back house of her father's property, cleaning, cooking, serving. Invisible. Just a plump shadow that shuffled around in the corners. The other women in town talked about her as if she didn't exist. "Poor Lucia," they would say. "She's going to die alone like a stray dog." The noise pulled her from her thoughts. Shouts, laughter, harsh voices cutting through the hot air. Lucia looked up and saw a crowd gathering in the center of the square. Men pushed forward for a better view. Women whispered behind their fans. Children ran between adults' legs, trying to get a peek. In the middle of it all, an iron cage. Lucia dropped her basket. The breads rolled across the dirt, but she didn't even see them. Her feet moved on their own, pushing her forward through the crowd. Her heart pounded as if it knew what she was about to find before her eyes even saw it. Inside the cage was an Apache man. He was kneeling, but not bowed. His hands were shackled behind his back, his shirt torn, dry blood at the corner of his mouth. His dark skin was burned by the sun, his black hair loose on his shoulders, old scars on his arms. He couldn't have been more than 35. His eyes were black as a moonless night, and when he looked at someone, it was as if he could see through their soul. But he wasn't alone. A small girl was sitting beside the cage, crying. She couldn't have been more than 7. Black hair braided, with colorful beads, a fringed leather dress. Her tears fell to the dirt and turned to mud. From time to time, she would yell something in Apache to the man in the cage, and he would reply in a hoarse voice, trying to calm her. "I caught this devil last night," yelled Colonel Mendoza, the commander of the local garrison. He was a short, fat man with a graying mustache and beady eyes. He and his family were camped near the river. They killed 2 cows from Don Fernando's ranch. "It's a lie." The Apache's voice cut through the air like a whip. He spoke Spanish with a heavy accent, but the words were clear. "We didn't kill anything. We only wanted water." Mendoza kicked the cage. The iron rattled. "Shut up, savage. You're going to learn to respect the law of civilized men." The crowd laughed. Some men threw rocks. One hit the Apache's shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. He just stared fixedly at Mendoza with such intense hatred that Lucia felt the air grow heavy. "What are you going to do with him?" asked Don Fernando, a tall, thin man who owned the biggest ranch in the region. His clothes were expensive, but his eyes were cold as metal. "I'm sending him to the fort in El Paso," Mendoza answered. "General Carson is always needing Apaches to work in the mines. This one will learn that an Indian doesn't rule on Christian land." The little girl cried louder. She tried to grab onto the cage bars, but a soldier pushed her away. She fell to the ground, soiling her dress, and kept crying. Lucia felt something break in her chest. She couldn't explain what it was. Maybe it was the way the Apache looked at his daughter, with a pain so deep that she recognized it. The same pain she felt when she thought of the children she never had. The same pain from when she held Rodrigo's cold body. "And the girl?" someone shouted from the crowd. Mendoza smiled. It was a smile that made Lucia's stomach turn. "The girl is going to the sisters' orphanage in Santa Fe. Or maybe some good family will want to adopt her. Teach her to live like a civilized person." "No!" The Apache's cry was like the roar of a wounded animal. "She is my daughter. You can't take her." "She's not anymore," Mendoza said. "Now she's the property of the U.S. government. She'll learn to read, write, and speak like a Christian. We'll make a decent person out of her." The Apache threw himself against the cage. And bars. The iron cut his skin, but he didn't stop. He screamed in his language, words Lucia didn't understand, but which carried all the despair in the world. The girl ran to the cage and tried to touch her father's hands through the bars. Lucia couldn't breathe properly anymore. The scene in front of her mixed with memories she tried to forget. Rodrigo dying in her arms, her father hitting her when he found out she couldn't have children, the townswomen whispering that God was punishing her for being ugly and useless. But there was something more, something in the way the Apache protected his daughter even while imprisoned, in the way his eyes burned with love and rage at the same time. Lucia had never seen a man fight so hard for someone, not even Rodrigo, who had died defending strangers. "Father! Father!" the girl screamed and hit the bars. "Don't leave me!" Mendoza lost his patience. He pulled the girl's arm with such force that she cried out in pain. "Enough! Soldiers! Take this little Indian girl to the sister's house and prepare the prisoner to leave tomorrow at dawn. Don't touch her." The Apache gripped the bars until his knuckles turned white. "If you lay a finger on my daughter, I swear by all the spirits of my ancestors that I will rip your heart out." Mendoza laughed loudly. "You won't do anything savage. You're going to the mines, and your daughter is going to learn to be a good Christian. In 20 years, she won't even remember you existed." The crowd began to disperse. The show was ending. Some men still threw rocks at the cage before leaving. Women dragged their children home. In a few minutes, only the soldiers and the cage would remain. Lucia couldn't move. Her feet seemed nailed to the ground. She looked at the Apache and saw Rodrigo. She looked at the girl and saw herself, an orphan and alone. Her mind went back to that terrible day when she buried her husband. How lost she felt, how she wished she had died with him. The Apache must have felt her eyes on him, because he suddenly looked directly at her. For a moment, it was as if the world stopped. In those black eyes, she saw a pain equal to her own, a loneliness equal to her own, a strength that refused to break, even when everything seemed lost. He said nothing. She didn't either. But something passed between them, a recognition, as if two wounded souls had met in the darkness. The girl noticed her father's gaze and followed his eyes to Lucia. For a second, she stopped crying. Her eyes were large and dark like her father's, but filled with tears. She extended a small hand in Lucia's direction, as if asking for help. Lucia's heart broke. That night, Lucia didn't sleep. She sat on the narrow bed in her little room, looking out the window at the stars. The house was silent. Her father snored in the next room, drunk as always. But her mind couldn't stop. She thought of the Apache. She thought of the girl. She thought of the way Mendoza laughed when he talked about separating them forever. She thought of the mines of El Paso, where men died like flies digging silver. For others, she thought of the sisters' orphanage, where Native American children had their names changed and were forbidden to speak their language. She got up and went to the small chest where she kept her few possessions. At the bottom, wrapped in a clean cloth, was Rodrigo's wedding ring. It was simple, just a silver band with a small cross engraved. She held it every night before sleeping, remembering the time when she wasn't alone. "What would you do, Rodrigo?" she whispered to the ring. "If that was our child in that cage?" But she already knew the answer. Rodrigo wouldn't hesitate. Rodrigo would do the right thing, even if it cost him his life. That's why he had died defending strangers on a dusty road. Lucia put the ring away and got dressed. She grabbed her black shawl and went out into the night. The streets were deserted. Only a few soldiers were on patrol, but she knew all the town's alleys and back streets. She reached the square without being seen. The cage was in the same place. A soldier slept sitting in a chair nearby, his rifle dropped in his lap. The Apache was awake, looking at the stars. The girl slept curled, up against the bars, using her father's shawl as a blanket. Lucia approached slowly. The Apache saw her coming but didn't move. He just watched her approach, like a feline studying a strange movement. She stopped 6 feet from the cage. For a long moment they just looked at each other. Then he spoke, softly so as not to wake his daughter. "Why are you here?" His voice was deep, hoarse. There was a dignity in it that made Lucia straighten up. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I just know I couldn't sleep." He nodded, as if he understood. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lucia Morales." "I am Nantan. This is Tayanita, my daughter." Lucia looked at the sleeping girl. Even in her sleep, her cheeks were still wet with tears. "How old is she?" 7. "She lost her mother last winter. Now she only has me." His voice broke a little on the last sentence. Lucia felt a pang in her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said. "About your wife." Nantan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was even lower. "She died of a fever. I couldn't save her. I was left alone to care for Tayanita." Lucia understood. She knew that pain, the pain of not being able to save someone you love, the pain of being alone in the world. "Do you have children?" Nantan asked. "No, I was never able to—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Your husband? He died 4 years ago, bandits on the road." Nantan nodded again. Two strangers united by loss, by loneliness, by the weight of a life that went on, even when everything seemed to have ended. "They're going to separate us tomorrow," he said. "They're going to take Tayanita away. She doesn't know anyone but me. She'll die of fear." Lucia looked at the sleeping girl and felt tears burn her eyes. She thought of her own childhood, motherless, with a father who blamed her for everything. She thought of how terrible it would be if someone had torn her away from the only arms that protected her. "The mines of El Paso," she began to say. "I know, men go in and don't come out, but it's not for me that I'm afraid. It's for her. Tayanita has never lived far from our land. She's never slept without hearing my voice. If they take me, she'll die inside." The pain in his voice was so real that Lucia had to lean on one of the cage bars. Her hands touched his by accident, and she felt how rough and calloused they were. The hands of a man who worked hard, the hands of a man who protected. "I wish I could help," she whispered. Nantan looked into her eyes. For a moment she saw something different there. Not despair, not rage, hope. "Maybe you can," he said. Before Lucia could ask what he meant, footsteps approached. The soldier sleeping in the chair was waking up. She quickly moved away from the cage and hid behind a wagon. The soldier got up, yawned, and walked around the cage. He kicked one of the bars. "Quiet in there, savage. Tomorrow you'll see what happens to those who mess with a white man's property." Nantan didn't answer. He just leaned against the bars and closed his eyes. But Lucia saw that he wasn't sleeping. He was thinking, planning. She returned home with her heart racing. She couldn't get the conversation with Nantan out of her mind. "Maybe you can," he had said. How could she help? She was just a woman alone, with no money, no power, no importance. What could she do against Colonel Mendoza and his soldiers? But as she lay in bed, an idea began to form in her mind. A crazy idea, dangerous, one that could cost her life. But it was the only chance Nantan and Tayanita had. And maybe it was also the only chance she had to feel alive again. Outside, the desert wind blew hard, bringing the smell of dry earth and thorny plants. Lucia closed her eyes and for the first time in 4 years prayed. Not for forgiveness or protection, she prayed for courage. Tomorrow, everything would change. Dawn arrived with a sky red as blood. Lucia woke before the sun, her heart beating. Like a war drum. She had only slept 2 hours, but she felt more awake than she had in years. The plan that had formed in her mind during the night was simple and dangerous. It might be the last thing she ever did. She dressed quickly. She grabbed the basket of breads and some items she had stored for years at the bottom of her chest. Rodrigo's kitchen knife, a small pouch with silver coins she had saved up penny by penny, and the only piece of jewelry she owned, a ring with a blue stone that had belonged to her mother. She left the house before her father woke up. The streets were still empty, only a few merchants preparing their stalls. Lucia walked straight to the blacksmith Joaquin's workshop, a man who drank more whiskey than water and was always in need of money. She found him already working, his hammer hitting hot iron. Sweat ran down his bearded face. When he saw Lucia, he stopped and looked at her in surprise. "Lucia, what are you doing here so early?" "I need a favor, Joaquin, and I'll pay well for it." The blacksmith's eyes gleamed. He put down his hammer and came closer. "What kind of favor?" Lucia showed him her mother's ring and the silver coins. "I need a key that will open any military lock." Joaquin frowned. "That's dangerous, Lucia. If Mendoza finds out, he won't find out. You make the key, I pay, and you forget you ever saw me today." The blacksmith looked at the money. It was more than he made in 2 months. "What do you want it for?" "That doesn't matter." Joaquin hesitated for a moment, then took the ring and the coins. "An hour. Come back in an hour and bring some whiskey. The good stuff." Lucia nodded and left. She bought a bottle of whiskey and returned to the square. The cage was still there, but now there were more soldiers. Mendoza was walking around, shouting orders. The Apache was awake, watching everything in silence. The girl was sitting beside the cage, not crying, but with red, swollen eyes. "I want him on the road before noon," Mendoza bellowed at a sergeant. "And that little Indian girl in the sister's wagon. The sooner they're out of here, the better." Lucia's stomach churned. She returned to Joaquin's workshop exactly an hour later. He was waiting for her with a small iron key and a drunken smile. "Ready," he said, taking the bottle of whiskey. "Opens any military lock made in the last 10 years. I tested it on an old handcuff I had here." Lucia hid the key among the breads and returned to the square. Her hand trembled as she approached the soldiers. "Good morning," she said in a soft voice. "I brought fresh breads for you and water for the prisoner." The sergeant, a fat man with rotten teeth, looked at her with contempt. "Since when do you care about an Apache, Lucia?" "I don't," she lied. "But a man dying of thirst can't walk to El Paso, and you'll have to carry him." The sergeant laughed and waved to the other soldiers. "Let her give the savage some water, but keep an eye on her." Lucia approached the cage with the jug of water and the basket of breads. Nantan watched her in silence, but his eyes were alert. She understood that he knew something was happening. "Water," she said loudly, for the soldiers to hear. Then softly, just for him, "When I give the signal, take Tayanita and run north. There's a trail between the red rocks. Wait for me there." Nantan nodded almost imperceptibly. His fingers touched hers when he took the jug, and she felt the strength in those calloused hands. Lucia pretended to arrange the breads in the basket while she worked on the lock. The key went in perfectly. The bolt gave way with a soft click that only she heard. But she didn't open the door yet. She needed to wait for the right moment. "Done," she said loudly. "He drank all the water." She began to move away from the cage, but suddenly tripped and dropped the basket. Breads rolled everywhere, and she cried out as if she had hurt herself. "Oh, my ankle!" The soldiers ran to help her up, laughing at the clumsy woman. In that moment of confusion, Nantan pushed the cage door. It opened silently. He came out like a cat and scooped Tayanita into his arms. The girl didn't make a sound, just clung to her father's neck. In seconds, the two disappeared between the houses. By the time the soldiers realized what had happened, Nantan and Tayanita were long gone. "The cage! The prisoner escaped!" the sergeant shouted. Mendoza came running, his face red with rage. "How did this happen? Who was on guard?" "The lock!" "It's open," a soldier said, examining the cage door. Mendoza's eyes turned to Lucia, who was still on the ground, feigning a sprained ankle. "You!" he roared. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," she protested. "I just brought water and breads." Mendoza grabbed her by the arm and pulled her up violently. "Liar! You helped him escape. Let go of her." The voice came from behind. Don Fernando approached with 3 of his ranch hands. "Lucia doesn't have the courage to kill a chicken. How would she help a dangerous Apache?" Mendoza hesitated. Don Fernando was right. Everyone knew Lucia as a timid and harmless woman. "Let's go after them," the colonel yelled. "They can't have gone far." "Which way did they go?" Don Fernando asked. "North," a soldier said. "I saw them running toward the rocks." Don Fernando smiled. It was a smile that made Lucia's blood run cold. "Perfect. There's only one trail in that direction. We'll surround. On them before sunset." Lucia felt the world spin. Her plan had worked, but now Nantan and Tayanita were being hunted like animals, and she was to blame. "What do we do with her?" the sergeant asked, pointing at Lucia. "Leave her be," Don Fernando said. "But keep an eye on her. If we find out she helped the Apache, she'll regret it for the rest of her life." The men mounted their horses and rode out of town like a swarm of angry bees. Lucia stood in the square, alone, trembling. She had crossed a line from which she could never return. She waited an hour, then grabbed some supplies from home and walked out of town on foot, taking the south trail. She knew the desert better than the soldiers. She knew shortcuts they didn't. She reached the red rocks before noon. She found Nantan and Tayanita hidden in a small cave among the stones. The girl was sleeping, exhausted. Nantan was awake, guarding the entrance. When he saw Lucia coming, he stood up quickly. For a moment, she thought he might attack her. But then she saw the recognition in his eyes. "You came," he said simply. "They're coming after you," Lucia said, breathless. "Mendoza and Don Fernando, with many men." Nantan nodded, as if he had expected it. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "Why did you help us?" Lucia looked at the sleeping Tayanita. The girl seemed so small, so defenseless. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in the world." Nantan studied her in silence for a long moment. Then he nodded again, as if she had passed a test. "They'll find us if we stay here," he said. "We have to go deeper into the desert." "I know," Lucia said. "I'm coming with you." "No, it's too dangerous. You've done your part. I have nowhere else to go. If Mendoza finds out I helped you—" Nantan understood. She had burned all her bridges behind her. Now she was like them, a fugitive. "The desert can kill," he warned. "Staying can, too." Nantan woke Tayanita gently. The girl opened her eyes and saw Lucia. For a moment she seemed scared. Then she looked at her father, who said something softly in Apache. The girl nodded and got up. "Does she understand Spanish?" Lucia asked. "A little, but she prefers our language." They left the cave and began walking north, always hiding among the rocks and thorny bushes. The sun was high and burned like a hot iron. Lucia had never walked so much in her life. Her legs ached, her feet bled inside her boots, but she didn't complain. Nantan carried Tayanita when she got tired. He knew the desert like Lucia knew her own home. He knew where to find water, which plants were edible, how to read the signs of the wind. Several times he stopped and stood still, listening. Then he would change direction. "Are they close?" Lucia asked at one of these stops. "Yes, but they're following the main trail. We're taking another way." At night they found shelter in a small grotto. Nantan made a fire with stones and dry sticks. He shared the little food he had with them, dried meat and roots he had gathered along the way. Tayanita sat beside Lucia and said something in Apache. "What did she say?" Lucia asked. "She asked if you were good." "And what did you answer?" "That, yes, that you saved us." The girl shyly touched Lucia's hand. Her big, dark eyes watched her, with curiosity. "How do you say thank you in your language?" Lucia asked. "Ahehe," Nantan answered. "Ahehe, Tayanita." The girl smiled for the first time since Lucia had met her. It was a small smile, but it lit up her entire face. "She liked that," Nantan said. "She doesn't smile at strangers. Am I not a stranger anymore? No, now you're family." The words hit Lucia like a thunderbolt. Family. She hadn't been part of a family for 4 years. She felt tears burn her eyes, but held them back. During their second night in the desert, they were attacked. Lucia woke up to the sound of horses. 4 men approached the grotto, rifles in their hands. They weren't Mendoza's soldiers. They were bounty hunters, tough men, who made money by capturing fugitives. Nantan was already awake, standing, protecting Tayanita and Lucia with his body. He had no weapons, just a small knife. "Come out of there, Apache!" one of the men yelled. "We know you're in there!" "And the Mexican woman too!" another shouted. "Don Fernando is paying well for both of you." Lucia felt her blood run cold. Don Fernando had put a price on her head too. "Surrender and no one gets hurt," the first man lied. Nantan didn't answer. He signaled for Lucia and Tayanita to stay behind him and prepared to fight, but Lucia did something even she didn't expect. She got up, grabbed a large stone, and ran out of the grotto, screaming. "Leave them alone!" she yelled, throwing the stone at the first hunter. The stone hit the man in the chest. He staggered and almost fell off his horse. The others laughed, but the distraction gave Nantan the chance he needed. He leapt like a mountain lion and pulled one of the men from his saddle. In seconds, he had a knife to his throat. "Drop your weapons, or I'll slit his throat," he roared. The hunters hesitated. The man Nantan was holding was pale with fear. "Do what he says," the prisoner yelled. Slowly, the other men dropped their rifles. Nantan took one of the guns and fired it into the air. The horses spooked and ran off, taking the hunters with them. When the dust settled, Nantan looked at Lucia, with something new in his eyes. Respect. "You fought," he said simply. "I fought," she answered, still trembling. "Why?" Lucia looked at Tayanita, who was watching her with admiration. "Because now I have something to fight for." That night, Nantan taught Lucia how to handle a knife. His hands guided hers, showing her how to hold the blade, how to attack, how to defend herself. It was the first time they had touched beyond a handshake. "You have strength," he said. "You just needed to find it." "How did you find it?" "When I saw you face 4 armed men with just 1 rock." Lucia smiled. For the first time in years, she felt strong. She felt alive. "Don't you?" The 3rd day, they arrived at the mountains where Nantan's people lived. It was a wild and beautiful place, with red rocks that climbed to the sky and crystal-clear streams running between the pines. But the reception was not warm. Several warriors surrounded them, all armed, all suspicious. They spoke in Apache with Nantan for a long time. Lucia understood that they were questioning her presence there. An older man, clearly a chief, approached Lucia. His eyes were hard as stone. "Mexican woman," he said in Spanish. "Why are you here?" "She saved us," Nantan answered before Lucia could speak. "She risked her life to free us, and brought trouble to us," the chief replied. "Mexican soldiers will come looking for her." "They won't find us," Nantan said, "and she has nowhere to go." The chief studied Lucia for a long moment. She tried to stand tall, even though she was afraid. "Can you fight?" he asked. "I'm learning." "Can you work?" "I know how to cook, sew, take care of children." "Can you respect our customs?" "I want to learn." The chief nodded slowly. "You will stay for a while. If you cause problems, you will leave." "I understand," Lucia said. Tayanita ran to her and took her hand. She said something in Apache to the chief. The older man smiled for the first time. "The girl says you are her new mother," Nantan translated, "and that he who saves an Apache child is also Apache." Lucia felt tears roll down her face. For the first time in her life, she belonged somewhere. But deep in the mountains, Don Fernando and his men had already found the trail that led to the Apache camp. The hunt had just begun. 3 months had passed since Lucia had arrived in the Apache mountains. Autumn painted the leaves golden and red, and she had learned to find beauty in this arid land she now called home. Her hands, once soft and useless, were calloused from working leather and weaving baskets. Her arms, once weak, now carried water and firewood without tiring. Most importantly, her eyes, once downcast and ashamed, now looked people directly in the eye when she spoke. Tayanita followed her everywhere, calling her Shima, mother. The girl had taught Lucia to speak Apache, and Lucia had taught Tayanita to embroider and sing songs in Spanish. At night, the two of them would sit by the fire while Nantan told ancient stories of his people. They were a family, strange, formed by pain and necessity, but real. Nantan had also changed. The quiet, suspicious man now smiled when Lucia stumbled over Apache words. His eyes softened when he saw her playing with Tayanita, and sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he would watch her with something that was not just gratitude. On the fateful morning, Lucia was at the stream washing clothes when she heard shouts coming from the camp. She dropped everything and ran back, her heart pounding. She found the whole tribe gathered around a young warrior who had arrived galloping, his horse frothing from running so hard. "What happened?" she asked Nantan. "Soldiers," he answered, his voice tense. "Many soldiers. They're coming up the mountain." Chief Manuelito, the older man who had accepted Lucia into the tribe, approached her with a somber face. "They're coming after you," he said. 50 men, Mexican and American soldiers together, and armed ranchers. Lucia felt the world spin. 50 men. Because of her, the whole tribe was in danger. "I'll go," she said immediately. "I won't let you suffer because of me." "No," Nantan said, grabbing her arm. "We don't abandon family." "But you're Apache now," Manuelito said, "and Apache doesn't abandon Apache." Lucia felt tears burn her eyes, but she held them back. It wasn't time to cry. It was time to fight. The tribe prepared for battle. Women and children were hidden in the highest caves. The warriors took up weapons and positioned themselves among the rocks. Lucia wanted to go with the other women, but Nantan stopped her. "You know how to shoot," he said, handing her a rifle, "and they're coming mostly for you. You fight with us." It was the first time Lucia had held a firearm. It weighed more than she expected, but her hands didn't tremble. The soldiers arrived at noon, when the sun was at its highest point. Don Fernando rode in front on a white horse, his face hard as stone. Beside him, Colonel Mendoza and his Mexican soldiers. Behind them, American men Lucia didn't know, but who seemed even more dangerous than the Mexicans. Don Fernando stopped 100 yards from the camp and shouted, "Apache, hand over the Mexican woman and no one has to die." Manuelito came out from behind the rocks, a rifle in his hand. "The woman is ours now," he replied in Spanish. "Go away or fight." Don Fernando laughed. It was a cold laugh that echoed through the mountains. "You old fools, you don't know who this woman is." "We know she saved an Apache child," Nantan shouted, appearing beside Manuelito. "That is enough for us. She is the widow of Rodrigo Morales," Don Fernando bellowed, "and the legal heir to 200 acres of the best land in the valley." Lucia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The land. It had always been about the land. Rodrigo had bought that property just before he died, with money he had saved for years of work. She had completely forgotten about the documents. "I'm the one who had your husband killed," Don Fernando continued, hatred dripping from every word. "He refused to sell to me. Now you'll sign the deed over to my name, or I'll kill every Apache. On this mountain." Lucia's world collapsed. Rodrigo. Her beloved Rodrigo had died, not by chance, not defending strangers. He had died because Don Fernando wanted his land, and she had spent 4 years blaming random bandits. The rage that grew in Lucia's chest was unlike anything she had ever felt. It wasn't the silent pain of someone who suffers. It was the burning fury of someone who finally understands injustice. "Murderer!" she yelled, coming out from behind the rocks. "You killed my husband." Don Fernando smiled when he saw her. Finally, the plump widow decided to show herself. "Come down here and sign the papers. I promise I'll kill you quickly." "Never!" Lucia bellowed. "I'd rather die than give you what Rodrigo built." "Then all of you will die," Don Fernando signaled to his men. 50 rifles were aimed at the rocks where the Apaches were hiding. "Last chance," the rancher yelled. "The woman or the war?" Manuelito looked at Lucia. Nantan looked at her. The whole tribe looked at her, waiting for her decision. Lucia took a deep breath. All her life she had hidden. She had accepted insults, contempt, loneliness. She had been content to be invisible. But not anymore. "My name is Lucia Morales," she shouted for all to hear. "I'm the widow of Rodrigo Morales, and this land where he died will not go into the dirty hands of murderers. If you want it, come and get it." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of rifles being readied. "Attack!" Don Fernando roared. The battle exploded like a storm of iron and fire. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, splinters flew in all directions. The Apaches were experienced warriors, every shot precise, every movement calculated, but it was 15 men against 50. Lucia took cover behind a large stone next to Nantan. Her hands trembled when she raised the rifle, but when she saw a soldier aiming at Tayanita, who was hidden in a nearby cave, all hesitation disappeared. She shot. The shot hit the man in the shoulder. He screamed and fell off his horse. Lucia had hit her first shot ever. "Good!" Nantan yelled, genuine admiration in his voice. The fight lasted 2 hours. The Apaches used the rocks and their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, but the soldiers had more ammunition and men. Slowly, they were surrounding the camp. That's when Lucia saw Don Fernando separate from the main group and go around the rocks, trying to get to the caves where the women and children were hiding. He was after Tayanita. "Nantan!" she yelled. "Don Fernando is going to the caves!" Nantan looked and saw the rancher climbing the rocks, 2 ranch hands with him. His face twisted in rage. "Take care of Tayanita," he said to Lucia. "I'm going after him." "No!" Lucia grabbed his arm. "We go together." "It's too dangerous." "Nantan," she said, looking deep into his eyes, "I love you, and I won't let you fight alone." It was the first time they had spoken of love. In the middle of the battle, between gunshots and screams, they finally said what they had both been feeling for months. Nantan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then we fight together." They climbed the rocks like 2 hunting wolves. Lucia had learned to move silently, to use the shadows. She was no longer the clumsy woman who tripped over her own dress. They found Don Fernando and his men at the entrance of the main cave. The rancher held Tayanita by the arm, the girl crying with fear. "Let her go!" Nantan roared. Don Fernando smiled and pointed a pistol at the girl's head. "Surrender or she dies." "No!" Lucia yelled. "She hasn't done anything wrong." "Yes, she has. She's a savage's daughter. The world will be better without her." Something broke inside Lucia. She saw Tayanita, the girl who called her mother, in mortal danger. She saw Don Fernando, the man who had killed Rodrigo, threatening to destroy another family. Without thinking, she lunged forward. Don Fernando shot, but Lucia was already moving. The bullet grazed her shoulder, tearing the skin, but she didn't stop. She threw herself on top of the rancher like a furious mountain lion. The two of them rolled on the ground, fighting for the pistol. Don Fernando was strong, but Lucia fought with the strength of desperation and accumulated rage. Her fingers found the knife Nantan had given her. In a single thrust, she buried the blade in the chest of the man who had destroyed her life. Don Fernando looked at her with surprise, then with fear. He tried to speak, but only blood came from his mouth. He fell backward and lay still. Lucia got up, trembling, the man's blood on her hands. She had killed. For the first time in her life, she had taken a life. Nantan took Tayanita in his arms and ran to Lucia. "Are you hurt?" "It's just a scratch," she said, looking at her bleeding shoulder. "Lucia." Nantan's voice was full of emotion. "You saved my daughter." "Our daughter," she corrected him. Nantan kissed her then. There, between rocks and blood, with the battle still roaring below, they kissed like two people who had found love in the most unlikely place in the world. The sound of gunshots gradually ceased. Don Fernando's ranch hands, seeing their boss dead, lost the courage to fight. Mendoza, without the rancher's support, ordered a retreat. In an hour, the soldiers were descending the mountain, defeated and humiliated. That night, the tribe celebrated. Not just the victory in battle, but the fact that Lucia had definitively proven she was one of them. She had fought like an Apache, had protected like an Apache, had killed like an Apache. Manuelito approached her while the campfires crackled. "You are no longer a Mexican woman," he said solemnly. "Now you are an Apache woman, and you deserve an Apache name." "What name?" she asked. "Itzabika," Nantan said, translating. "Brave woman." A week later, Lucia and Nantan married in the Apache tradition. The ceremony was simple but profound. They exchanged vows before the sacred fire, with the whole tribe as witnesses. Tayanita danced around them, laughing and singing. Lucia wore a leather dress decorated with beads that the other women had made for her. Around her neck, the necklace that had belonged to Nantan's first wife, a symbol that she was accepted not as a substitute, but as a continuation of the family. "Are you sure?" Nantan asked as they danced. "Life in the desert is hard. There will always be dangers." Lucia looked around. She saw Tayanita playing with the other children. She saw Manuelito smiling approvingly. She saw the red mountains rising against the starry sky. She saw her new family, her new life, her new world. "I'm sure," she said. "For the first time in my life, I'm sure of something." Nantan spun her in the dance and she laughed, a loud, free laugh, full of joy. The sound a woman makes when she finally finds her place in the world. Months later, when the documents for Rodrigo's land were finally found and validated, Lucia donated them to the poor Mexican families in the area. She no longer needed land to feel rich. She had something much more valuable. On their first wedding anniversary, Tayanita got a baby brother. Lucia held the baby in her arms and cried with happiness. At 33 years old, she was finally a mother. "What should we name him?" Nantan asked. "Rodrigo," she said without hesitation, "so that my first husband knows he wasn't forgotten." And so that my second husband knows he lives on in our hearts." Nantan nodded. There was no jealousy in him, only understanding. True love doesn't erase the past. It incorporates it and transforms it into something new. That night, Lucia went out of the teepee and looked at the stars. She thought of the woman she had been, fat, ugly, invisible, voiceless. She thought of the woman she had become, strong, brave, loved, respected. The desert had been her hell, but it had also been her salvation. Nantan appeared behind her and wrapped his arms around her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange fate is," she said. "If Don Fernando hadn't killed Rodrigo, I never would have been alone. If I hadn't been alone, I never would have helped you. If I hadn't helped you, I never would have found my true family." "Suffering is sometimes the path to happiness," Nantan said philosophically. "My people believe the spirits lead us to where we need to be. Even if it's hard to get there. Especially when it's hard." Lucia snuggled into his arms. Inside the teepee, Tayanita slept next to baby Rodrigo. Her family, her life, her love built with truth and honor. The desert wind blew softly through the pines, bringing the smell of dry earth and wildflowers. Lucia closed her eyes and smiled. She was finally home.